YouTube. This is Kyle Graves live, coming to you with something a little different than I'm normally used to. This is a book review of one of in my opinion, one of the most important books ever written by a man named Bernal Diaz, a name lost to history. He was a foot soldier for Hernan Cortez during the conquest of New Spain, now known as Mexico. Um, it's such an incredible story. So many things had to go right for the conquistadors in order for them to win. I'm going to take my headphones off here since I'm just going to be reading online. I'm actually going to be reading excerpts from this book. You can read this book for free on Google Books. Because the book was written by Bernal Diaz later in life in the middle 1500s, and he passed away, and it wasn't officially published until dang near the 1700s. So it's free to read in its entirety online. But how did Cortez defeat the Aztecs? And to me, it's none other than divinely orchestrated. In a world, in a continent that had never experienced Christianity. That's not to say that the Christian Spanish conquistadors were all that great of people. They did some atrocities to the Aztecs. It People can do terrible things in the name of religion or just in general. But as far as the story goes from Bernal Diaz, it's awe-inspiring and divinely orchestrated. If certain things hadn't happened, there's no way that 400 men could have defeated hundreds of thousands of Aztecs, hundreds of thousands of them. No matter, and their technology wasn't that much greater. I mean, yeah, they had swords, they had metal swords, and they had cannons and horses, but compared to hundreds of thousands of Aztecs, Mexicans, if certain things hadn't have happened, there's no way that the Mexicans should have lost. They should have just destroyed the conquistadors and Hernan Cortez. But why didn't they? Three big things. One, Montezuma was a horrible, horrible leader. Here we are. We're getting here to this right here. Okay. So Cortez was a terrible leader. Montezuma was a terrible leader. He was raiding villages, sacrificing, taking people at will. If you've seen the movie Apocalypto, that's kind of like a Disney Channel version of their reality, because they are not only sacrificing them, but they are also eating them for like barbecues and fiestas. That's well documented. So all of these people in surrounding city-states hated Montezuma. And all of a sudden here comes Cortez, who stood up to him, and all of the people rallied around Cortez as a godsend, as a savior. They actually called him a Tulul, which is, a god, because they couldn't defeat Montezuma. They could have defeated Montezuma, but they didn't have it in their mind to unite all the city-states. But Cortez gave them the confidence to fight Montezuma. And a series of events happened that, if they hadn't happened, that God had planned out, that I believe that God had planned this out years in advance, decades in advance, for the coming of Cortez. And it just rolled out the red carpet in a series of events that enabled Cortez to march to Mexico and defeat Montezuma with the aid of 100,000 Aztecs, or maybe more, to attack Tenochtitlan, Mexico City. One of the most amazing stories in the last 1,000 years, and in a biblical perspective, it's relevant because here is a continent that was unaware of Jesus Christ, and their behaviors and their attitudes and their culture reflected this, compared to the conquistadors were appalled at they were appalled, and at the same time they were amazed, because the Aztecs were a beautifully creative people, very intelligent. And one of the most heartbreaking things of this whole event is that the conquistadors burned the Aztecs books, thousands of them. There's only a handful of them that remain, and they're in the British Museum, if I'm correct. You can look those up online. They look like maps, they're folded like maps, but they're housed in the British Museum. But let's get to it here. I'm going to read you a few excerpts here from the book that I thought were really interesting. I don't have time to read you the entire book. You can read it for free on Google Books. It's around 500-600 pages. But I'm just going to read you a few chapters and kind of go over a few parts that I think were inspirational and divinely orchestrated. All right, let's get to it. Let's see if that pops up there. Oh, you can read it. The True History. So this is The True History, The Conquest of New Spain. I'm going to shrink this. The Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of its conquerors. Wow. Wow. And this was published originally in the late 1600s, about 100 years after Bernal Diaz has passed. Okay, let me get here. Bear with me here while I get to the table of contents. All right. So Bernal Diaz, a little backstory on him. He had been in Cuba for about 10 years longer than Cortez, and he had gone on many different expeditions. And because that he was a seasoned veteran, which is why Cortez wanted him and all other conquistadors who had sailed inland. And it starts from Cozumel, the island of Cozumel. I'm talking about the Horn of Mexico. This is where the story takes place, from Cozumel to the Horn of Mexico, and then inland toward Mexico City. And there's beef here. They're talking about the governor, Diego Vasquez. Of course, he was wanting the fame and glory of capturing, Mexico. They didn't know Mexico existed yet, but there was a mutiny, a faction between Cortez and his men that I'll discuss later on. Okay, so here is the first. Here's the first part of the story here that I would like to. Oh, and by the way, I just clicked on that. Please like and subscribe here. I'm doing this for the love of it and my passion, but I'm close to getting 1,000 subscribers, and I sure would appreciate it if you did subscribe. But that being said, this chapter here, I think, is where I'm going to start off with, because it's how the Spaniard named Geronimo de Aguilar, who was a prisoner among the Indians, returned to Cozumel and came with us. So this man was a Spaniard who, like Bernal Diaz, was a conquistador who went on a previous mission some 8 years prior to Cortez's expedition into the mainland of Mexico. And while they set sail, while the Spanish ships were close, out at sea, this man, Geronimo de Aguilar, 8 years prior, his expedition, they were shipwrecked, and he was immediately enslaved by the Mexicans. And so for 8 years, he had been subject to hard labor and abuse. But within that time frame, he was able to learn how to speak that local dialect. So here we go to the first event that was divinely orchestrated years and years in advance. Because without Geronimo de Aguilar, the Spaniards would have no idea how to communicate with the indigenous tribes, and there are many different dialects within the city-states of Mexico. So without Geronimo de Aguilar, they would have no chance to be able to communicate effectively with the indigenous tribes, the Aztecs of Mexico. So this is the first event here that was divinely orchestrated. So let's get to it. Okay. How the Spaniard named Geronimo de Aguilar, who was a prisoner among the Indians, heard that we had returned to Cozumel and came to us, and what else took place. Let me try to I'm going to try to shorten this here to where you can read it, possibly follow along with me here. Oh, is that? Yeah, perfect. When the Spaniard, who was a prisoner among the Indians, knew for certain that we had returned, and this is Bernal Diaz writing this, when the Spaniard, who was a prisoner among the Indians, knew for certain that we had returned to Cozumel with the ships, he was very joyful and gave thanks to God, and he came in all haste with the 2 Indians he had carried, the letters and ransom, and embarked in a canoe. And as he was able to pay well with the green beads we had sent him, he soon hired a canoe and 6 Indian rowers, and they rowed so fast, meeting no head wind, in a very short time they crossed the strait between the 2 shores, which is a distance of about 4 leagues. When they arrived on the coast of Cozumel and were disembarking, some soldiers who had gone out hunting, for there were wild pigs on the island, told Cortez that a large canoe, which had come from the direction of Cape Catoche, had arrived near the town. Cortez sent Andres de Tapia and 2 other soldiers to go and see, for it was a new thing for Indians to come fearlessly in large canoes into our neighborhood. So they set out, and as soon as the Indians who came in the canoe which Aguilar hired caught sight of the Spaniards, they were frightened and wished to go back into the canoe and flee away. Aguilar told them in their own language not to be afraid, that these men were his brothers. When Andres de Tapia saw that they were only Indians, for Aguilar looked neither more nor less than an Indian, he at once sent word for Cortez by a Spaniard that they were Cozumel Indians who had come in the canoe. As soon as the men had landed, the Spaniards, in words badly articulated and worse pronounced, cried, "Dios y Santa Maria de Sevilla," and Tapia went at once to embrace him. The other soldier who had accompanied Tapia, when he saw what had happened, promptly ran to Cortez to beg for a reward for the good news. For it was a Spaniard who had come in the canoe, and we were all delighted when we had heard it. Tapia soon brought the Spaniard to Cortez, but before he arrived, Cortez was standing with several Spaniards, asked Tapia where the Spaniard was, although he was walking by his side, for they could not distinguish him from an Indian, as he was naturally brown, and he had his hair shorn like an Indian slave, and carried a paddle on his shoulder. He was shod with one old sandal, and the other was tied to his belt. He had on a ragged old cloak, and a worse loins cloth with which he covered his nakedness. And he had tied up in a bundle in his cloak a book of hours, old and worn. When Cortez saw him in this state, he too was deceived like the other soldiers, and asked Tapia, "Where is the Spaniard?" On hearing this, the Spaniard squatted down on his haunches as the Indians do, and said, "I am he." Cortez at once ordered him to be given a shirt and doublet and drawers, and a cape and sandals, for he had no other clothes, and asked him about himself, and what his name was, and when he came to this country. The man replied, pronouncing with difficulty, that he was called Geronimo de Aguilar, a native of Vizcaya, and that he had taken holy orders that 8 years had passed since he and 15 other men and 2 women left Darien for the island of Santo Domingo, where he had some disputes and a lawsuit with a certain Enciso y Valvida, and he said that they were carrying 10,000 gold dollars, and the legal documents of the case. and that the ship in which they sailed struck on the Alcarines, so that she could not be floated, and that he and his companions and the two women got into the ship's boat, thinking to reach the island of Cuba or Jamaica, but that the currents were very strong and carried them to this land, and that the Calciones of that district had divided them among themselves, and that many of his companions had been sacrificed to the idols, and that the others had died of disease, and the women had died of overwork. I'm sorry. And that the women had died of overwork only a short time before, for they had been made to grind corn, that the Indians had intended him for a sacrifice, but one night he escaped and fled to the Cacique, with whom since he had been living. I don't remember the name that he gave, and none were left of all his party except himself and a certain Gonzalo Guerrero, whom he had gone to summon, but he would not come. When Cortez heard of this, he gave thanks to God, and said that he would have him well looked after and rewarded. He questioned Aguilar about the country and the towns, but Aguilar replied that having been a slave, he knew only about hewing wood and drawing water and digging in the fields, that he had only once traveled as far as 4 leagues from home when he was sent with a load, but as it was heavier than he could carry, he fell ill, but that he understood that there were very many towns. When questioned about Gonzalo Guerrero, he said that he was married and had 3 sons. This guy's very interesting, this Gonzalo Guerrero character, because they treated him very differently than Geronimo Aguilar. He was viewed as a leader. Gonzalo became a leader in his indigenous Aztec tribe, and he had a family. He was presented with a woman. Women were treated more or less like cattle, as we'll find out with Donna Marina. Another divinely orchestrated event with Cortez, Donna Marina. But this Gonzalo Guerrero character fell in love with the Aztec woman and the Aztec people and their culture, and he actually fights in some of the battles. He fights against the Spaniards and tried to get all the Aztecs battle ready to fight the Aztecs, because they thought that they were gods in their metal armor and their horses. They had never seen horses. They thought the horses and the soldier riding on top were all one creature. So Gonzalo basically sides with the Aztecs and fights along with the Aztecs. So it's very interesting. That'd be an interesting movie. When questioned about Gonzalo Guerrero, he said that he was married and had 3 sons, and that his face was tattooed and his ears and lower lip were pierced, that he was a seaman and native of Palos, and that the Indians considered him to be very valiant, that when little more than a year ago a captain and 3 vessels arrived and he in Cape Catoche, it seems probable that this was when we came with Francisco Hernandez de Cordova. It was at the suggestion of Guerrero that the Indians attacked them, and that he was there himself in the company of the Cacique, which is the chief of the large town, whom I have spoken about when describing the expedition of Francisco Hernandez de Cordova. When Cortez heard this, he exclaimed, "I wish I had him in my hands, for it will never do to leave him here." When the Caciques of Cozumel found out that Aguilar could speak their language, they gave him to eat of their best, and Aguilar advised them to always respect and revere the holy image of Our Lady and the cross, for they would find that it would benefit them greatly. On the advice of Aguilar, the Caciques asked Cortez to give them a letter of recommendation, so that if any other Spaniards came to that port, they would treat the Indians well and do them no harm. This is the true story of Aguilar, and not the other which the historian Gamarra has written. However, I am not surprised that what he says is news to me. Now I must go on with my story. Bernal Diaz has major beef with this historian Gomera, who wrote a book. He basically became famous and wrote the first book about the conquest of Spain. And Bernal Diaz read it and was so angered by it because he said it was just an entire fabrication. That, I was there with Cortez on a daily basis. I was there for the whole thing. And he wrote his book, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain. One of the greatest books that I've ever written or I've ever read. And I'm going to go back here. So, all right. So we've got the first divine encounter here with Geronimo de Aguilar, a godsend that he had. Poor Aguilar had been a slave for 8 years, but within that 8 years he was able to speak the language. So this is the first instance where Cortez is not having to just fight with all of the Indians, that he can actually communicate with them now and convince them that he's here for peace and that he's their ally. So let me go back to the title page here, the table of contents, find the next chapter. Forgive me if I'm kind of hasty here. Okay. There's the first battle here that I'd like to read about somewhere coming up. Just to give you kind of an idea of how the battle was and how Bernal Diaz and Cortez and all the men reacted. Okay. Okay, the battle which we fought right here. How Cortez told us all to get ready by the next day to go in search. How Cortez told us all to get ready by the next day to go in search of the Indian host, and ordered the horses to be brought from the ships, and what happened in the battle which we fought. As soon as Cortez knew for certain that the Indians intended to make war on us, he ordered all the horses to be landed from the ship without delay, and that crossbowmen and musketeers and all of us soldiers, even those who were wounded, to have our arms ready for use. When the horses were brought on shore, they were very stiff and afraid to move, for they had been many days on board the ship, but the next day they moved quite freely. At that time it happened that 6 or 7 soldiers, young men and otherwise in good health, suffered from pains in their loins, so that they could not stand on their feet, and had to be carried on men's backs. We do not know what this sickness came from. Some say that they fell ill on account of the quilted cotton armor which they never took off, but wore day and night, and because in Cuba they had lived daintily and were not used to hard work, so in the heat they fell ill. Cortez ordered them not to remain on land, but to be taken at once on board ship. The best horses and riders were chosen to form the cavalry, and the horses had little bells attached to their breastplates. The men were ordered not to stop to spear those who were down, but to aim their lances at the faces of the enemy. 13 gentlemen were chosen to go on horseback with Cortez in command of them, and I record their names: Cortez, Cristoval de Orlid, Pedro de Alvarado, Alonso Hernandez Puerto Carrero, Juan de Escalante, Francisco de Montejo, and Alonso de Alvia, to whom was given the horse belonging to Ortiz the musician, and Bartolome Garcia, for neither of those men were good horsemen. Juan Velasquez de Leon, Francisco, okay, well, you get it. Cortez ordered Mesa, the artilleryman, to have his guns ready, and he placed Diego de Ordaz in command of us foot soldiers. and he also had command of the musketeers and bowmen, for he was no horseman. Very early the next day, which was the day of Nuestra Senora de Marzo, after hearing Mass, which was said by Fray Bartolome de Alamido, we formed in order under our standard-bearer, who at the time was Antonio de Veliero, the husband of Isabel de Ordilla, who afterwards changed his name to Antonio Sereno de Cardona, and marched to some large savannas where Francisco de Luego and Pedro de Alvaro had been attacked, about a league distance from the camp we had left, and that savanna and township was called Centilla, and was subject to Tabasco. Where you go, you get the hot sauce from, right? Cortez and his horsemen were separated a short distance from us on account of some swamps, which could not be crossed by the horses, and as we were marching along in the way I have said, we came on the whole force of Indian warriors, who were on the way to attack us in our camp. It was near the town of Cintla that we met them on an open plain. So it happened that those warriors were looking for us with the intention of attacking us, and we were looking for them for the very same purpose. Oh, Bernal Diaz, man, he's a great writer. I must leave off here and, well, go on to tell what happened in the battle, and one may well call it a battle, as will be seen further on. How all the Caciques, the leaders of Tabasco and its dependencies, attacked us, and what came of it. I have already said how we were marching along when we met all of the forces of the enemy, which were moving in search of us, and all of the men wore great feather crests. They carried drums and trumpets, and their faces were colored black and white, and they were armed with large bows and arrows, lances and shields, and swords shaped like our two-handed swords, and many slings and stones and fire-hardened javelins, and all wore quilted cotton armor, which was, insufficient compared to their metal armor and, steel swords. As they approached, as their squadrons were so numerous that they covered the plain, and they rushed us like mad dogs, completely surrounding us, and they let fly such a cloud of arrows, javelins, and stones, that at the first assault they wounded over 70 of us. Fighting hand to hand, they did us great damage with their lances, and one soldier fell dead at once from an arrow wound in the ear, and they kept on shooting and wounding us. With our muskets and crossbows, and with good sword play, we did not fail as stout fighters, and when they came to feel the edge of our swords, little by little they fell back, but it was only so as to shoot us in greater safety. Mesa, our artilleryman, killed many of them with his cannon, for they were formed in great squadrons, and they did not open out so that we could fire at them as we pleased, but with all the hurts and wounds which we gave them, we could not drive them off. I said to Diego de Ordaz, it seems to me that we ought to close up and charge them, for in truth they suffered greatly from the strokes and thrusts of our swords, and that was why they fell away from us, both from fear of these swords and the better to shoot their arrows and hurl their javelins and hail of stones. Ordaz replied that it was not good advice, for there were 300 Indians to every one of us. So that just shows you that there was, there's thousands of them. So there we stood, enduring their attack. However, we did agree to get us near as we could to them, as I advised Ordaz, so as to give them a bad time with our swordsmanship, and they suffered so much that they retreated towards a swamp. I'm going to shorten this again. During all this time, Cortez and his horsemen failed to appear although we greatly longed for him, and we feared that by chance some disaster had befallen him. I remember that when we fired shots, the Indians gave great shouts and whistles and threw dust and rubbish into the air so that we could not see the damage done to them. And they sounded their trumpets and drums and shouted and whistled and cried, "Ah la 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 la!" Just at this time we caught sight of our horsemen, and as great Indian host was crazed with its attack on us, it did not at once perceive them coming up behind their backs. And as the plain was level ground, and the horsemen were good riders, and many of the horses were very handy and fine gallopers, they came quickly on the enemy and speared them as they chose. As soon as we saw the horsemen, we fell on the Indians with such an energy that with us attacking on one side and the horsemen on the other, they soon turned tail. The Indians thought that the horse and its rider was all one animal, for they had never seen horses up to this time. The savannas and fields were crowded with Indians running to take refuge in the thick woods nearby. After we had defeated the enemy, Cortez told us that he had not been able to come to us sooner, as there was a swamp in the way, and he had to fight his way through another force of warriors before he could reach us, and 3 horsemen and 5 horses had been wounded. As soon as the horsemen had dismounted under some trees and houses, we returned thanks to God for giving us so complete a victory. As it was Lady Day, we gave to the town which was afterwards founded by the name of Santa Maria de la Victoria, on account of this great victory being won on Our Lady's Day. This was the first battle that we fought under Cortez in New Spain. After this we bound up the hurts of the wounded with cloths, for we had nothing else, and we doctored the horses by searing their wounds with the fat from the body of a dead Indian, which we cut up to get out the fat, and we went to look at the dead lying on the plain, and there were more than 800 of them, the greater number killed by thrusts, the others by the cannon, muskets, and crossbows, and many had stretched on the ground half dead. Where the horsemen had passed, numbers of them lay dead or groaning from their wounds. The battle lasted over an hour, and the Indians fought all the time like brave warriors until the horsemen came up. We took 5 prisoners, 2 of them captains, as it was late and we had had enough fighting. And we had not eaten anything. We returned to our camp. Then we buried the 2 soldiers who had been killed, one by the wound in the ear and the other by a wound in the throat, and we seared the wounds of the others and of the horses with the fat of the Indian. And after posting sentinels and guards, we had supper and rested. It was on this occasion that Francisco Lopez de Gomora says that Francisco de Mola set out on a dapple gray horse before Cortez and the other horsemen arrived, and that the sainted apostles, Señor Santiago and Señor San Pedro, appeared. So here he is saying, Bernal Diaz saying, a miracle appeared, that the ghosts of 2 saints appeared. I say that all our doings and our victories are at the hands of our Lord Jesus Christ, and that in this battle there were so many Indians to every one of us that they could have blinded us with the dust they raised, but for the pity of God, who always helps us, it may be that, as Gomorrah says, the glorious apostles Señor Santiago and Señor San Pedro came to our aid, and that I, being a sinner, was not worthy to behold them. What I saw was Francisco de Morla on a chestnut horse, who came up at the time as Cortez, and it seems to me that now, as I write, I can see again with these sinful eyes all that battle in the very way that it took place. And although I am a poor sinner and not worthy to see either of those glorious apostles, they were there in our company, over 400 soldiers, and Cortez himself, and many other gentlemen. And it would have been talked about, and evidence would have been taken, and a church would have been built when the town was founded, and the town would have been named Santiago de la Victoria or San Pedro de la Victoria instead of Santa Maria de la Victoria. If it was Gomera says, we must have all been very bad Christians. So he's saying that, when our Lord God sent his holy apostle to us, not to recognize the great favor that he was showing to us, and not daily to have venerated that church. I wish to God it were as the historian Gomorrah says, but until I read his history, one never heard about it among the conquistadors who were there at the time. So Gomorrah, the other writer, the other historian, said that there was a holy, divine, of the apostles appeared. But then Bernal Diaz was like, no, that's not the case. But if it wasn't for those horses there, then they had never seen horses before, so they were terrified of them, and the guns. Okay. So the Caciques were the chiefs, and so as the Spaniards were marching inland, they kept meeting these city-states, these tribal leaders of the city-states, the Caciques. And so I just wanted to read that battle scene because I thought it was cool. But I want to get into Donna Marina, so I'm going to go back to the table of contents here. And Donna Marina is another example of a divine event, a divine gift to Cortez and the conquistadors. Because without Donna Marina, there's no way that they could have won, because they couldn't have communicated further on. And sadly, Donna Marina was a women at this time, they basically had no rights, and Donna Marina was basically a sex slave. She had been passed around to different tribal leaders throughout Mexico, and within that time, within her whole life of abuse and trauma, that she had learned how to speak 6 or 7 languages, all of the languages of Mexico, and she was able to communicate with when the Spaniards entered into a small city-state. The tribal leader gave Donna Marina to Cortez, and then Geronimo Aguilar was able to communicate with Donna Marina, but Aguilar couldn't communicate with these other people because he only knew the dialect of this small, certain town, because he had been a slave for 8 years. So if it hadn't have been for Aguilar or Geronimo becoming a slave and learning to speak that dialect, and Donna Marina being a sex slave for basically her entire life, passed around to all of these different city-states and learning 6, 7, 8 languages, dialects, Cortez would never been able to communicate with any of the Indians throughout Mexico. He would never been able to persuade them that he would fight for them and defeat Montezuma, and to rally the troops for them to, to take courage and to fight Montezuma, and they're going to defeat him and take him down. I mean, this was all divinely orchestrated, that it took years to advance, and that God was basically rolling out the red carpet for Cortez. Let's go here, Donna Marina. Okay, showing that Donna Marina was a Cacique and the daughter of persons of high rank, and was the mistress of towns and vassals, and how it happened that she was taken to Tabasco. All right, let's get to it. But before that, let me check my stream here, because sometimes my stream gives me issues. But no, we got a good stream here, thank God. All right, so okay. Before telling about the great Montezuma and the city of Mexico and the Mexicans, I wish to give some account of Donna Marina, This shows the importance of how important Donna Marina was. If it wasn't for Donna Marina, the conquistadors do not beat Montezuma. I wish to give an account of Donna Marina, who from her childhood had been the mistress and cacica of towns and vassals. It happened in this way. Her father and mother were chiefs and caciques of a town called Painala, which had other towns subject to it, and stood about 8 leagues from the town of Coatzacoalcos. Her father died while she was still a little child, and her mother married another cacique, a young man, and bore him a son. It seems that the father and mother had a great affection for the son, and it was agreed between them that he should succeed to their honors when their days were done, so that there should be no impediment to this. They gave this little girl, Donna Marina, to some Indians from Xuexalango, and this they did by night so as to escape observation, and they then spread the report that she had died. And as it happened at this time that a child of one of their Indian slaves died, they gave out that it was their daughter and the heiress who was dead. So they just did some terrible things to just get rid of Donna Marina. They just said she was dead and they sold her into slavery. The Indians of Xuexalango gave the child to the people of Tabasco, and the Tabasco people gave her to Cortez. I myself knew her mother and the old woman's son, her half-brother, when he was already grown up, and ruled the town jointly with his mother, for the second husband of the old lady was dead. When they became Christians, the old lady was called Marta and the son Lazaro. I knew all this very well because in the year 1523, after the conquest of Mexico and the other provinces, when Cristoval de Olid revolted in Honduras and Cortez was on his way there, he passed through Coatzacoalcos, and I and the great number of the settlers of that town accompanied him on that expedition, as I shall relate in the proper time and place, as Donna Marina proved herself such an excellent woman and good interpreter throughout the wars in New Spain. To Tlaxcala and Mexico, as I shall show later on, Cortez always took her with him, and during that expedition she was married to a gentleman named Juan Huaramilo at the town of Orizaba before certain witnesses, one of whom was named Orlando, a settler in Tabasco, and this man told me about the marriage, not in the way that the historian Gomara relates it. Oh man, he hates Gomara. Donna Marina was a person of the greatest importance and was obeyed without question by the Indians throughout New Spain. When Cortez was in the town of Coatzacoalcos, he sent to summon to his presence all the caciques of that province, the chiefs, in order to make them a speech about our holy religion and about their good treatment. And among the caciques who assembled was the mother of Donna Marina and her half-brother. Oh, they didn't know, and this is just so great that, and they didn't know that she was with Cortez and was with them, and they thought that that they had just given her up to as a little slave, as a little girl. Sometime before this, Donna Marina had told me that she belonged to that province and that she was the mistress of vassals, and Cortez also knew it well, as did Aguilar the interpreter. In such a manner it was that mother, daughter, and son came together, and it was easy enough to see that she was the daughter from the strong likeness she bore to her mother. These relations were in great fear of Donna Marina, for they thought that she had sent for them to put them to death, and they were weeping. When Donna Marina saw them in tears, she consoled them and told them to have no fear, that when they had given her over to the men from Xuexalango, they knew not what they were doing, and she forgave them for doing it, And she gave them many jewels of gold and raiment, and told them to return to their town, and said that God had been gracious to her in freeing her from the worship of idols and making her a Christian, and letting her bear a son to her lord and master Cortez, and in marrying her to such a gentleman as Juan Jaramillo, who was now her husband, that she would rather serve her husband and Cortez than anything else in the world, and would not exchange her place to be cacica of all the provinces in New Spain. And this which I have repeated here, I know for certain, and I swear to it. This seems to me very much like what took place between Joseph and his brethren in Egypt, when they came into his power over the matter of the wheat. Man, this is so powerful and emotional by Bernal Diaz, because he's comparing this to those of you out there who aren't really familiar with the Bible. He's comparing Donna Marina to the story of Joseph in the Bible, who Joseph was his father's favorite son of like 10 kids, I think, and his son gave him a coat. His father made him a coat, a special coat of many colors, and the brothers were jealous, very jealous of Joseph, and they sold him into slavery, into Egypt. And Joseph was lied on by the guy the slave master's wife. He was thrown into jail for a decade or longer, that he was just rotting away in jail. But God showed his favor on Joseph, and he became well respected by the guards, and eventually to where he ended up giving advice and interpreting a dream of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh made him the basically his vice president, or his he brought him into his cabinet and made him a leader in Egypt, a prime minister, vice president, what have you. And this is how it's very emotional that Bernal is comparing this exact same coincidence, ironic coincidence, to Donna Marina, to Joseph in the Bible. And this is a divine event for Cortez and the conquistadors, because without Donna Marina, there's no way that they win. There's no way that they can even communicate with the Indians to politically convince them to be their allies, and for Cortez to give them strength and say, hey, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to beat Montezuma because he's been sacrificing and eating your children. And so they were quick to fight with Cortez and rally behind him once they all realized that he was wanting to fight Montezuma, because they hated Montezuma too. And that never could have happened without Donna Marina, and she was just presented to Cortez as a gift. And she bore Cortez's son. But this is just another divine, and not to say that was wrong by Cortez, who had a wife back home, but yet, now this goes on to these are fallible men. These weren't, like we all are sinners. I mean, Cortez was married, but yet he knocks up Donna Marina and probably several other Indian women that were just given to them as, sex slaves, basically. To go back to my subject, Bernal Diaz here. To go back to my subject, Donna Marina knew the language of Quetzalcoatlus, which is that common to Mexico, and she knew the language of Tabasco, as did also Geronimo de Aguilar, who spoke the language of Yucatan and Tabasco, which is one and the same, so that these two could understand one another clearly, and Aguilar translated into Castilian for Cortez. So you see how they're doing it. Cortez is speaking to Aguilar, Aguilar speaking to Donna Marina, and Donna Marina is speaking to the new chiefs of the city-states as they're going farther inland toward Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, the capital of the Aztecs. So that's incredibly important. Really the second divine gift given to the conquistadors. It's not a coincidence. It's divinely orchestrated. Okay. So now we have two interpreters for Cortez. And here is how Cortez starts to rally all of the Mexicans, all of the Aztecs against Montezuma. This is going to be good. And I might have to do another video on this later as far as the attack of Tenochtitlan. But this is basically how they won. And it was really before they won really before they attacked Tenochtitlan, because they had the numbers, because of political. Cortez was a master politician. Okay. There was a mutiny of the soldiers, and several of them left. They got on a boat and left as soon as they were told by a chief that there was a capital city. Cortez was giving orders to go back to Cuba, because Diego Vasquez, the governor of Cuba, wanted the fame and glory to be the leader to vanquish the Mexican capital city. But Cortez wasn't having that. Okay, here we go. Cortez ordered the 5 tax gatherers of Montezuma to be taken prisoner. Here we go. Okay, so basically, if you've seen the movie Apocalypto, this is something very similar in my mind. That appears that these tax gatherers from Montezuma come roaming around all of the city-states throughout Mexico, and they just randomly come upon Cortez. They probably knew all about him, but they tried to make it seem like it was a surprise or an accident. But they are telling the chiefs that they are going to sacrifice them because they are helping Cortez. And so because Cortez now has his 2 interpreters, that he now see a political opportunity to exploit, which otherwise he never would have gotten a chance to make them let the Indians choose his side, because Montezuma's raiding villages, taking children and men, women, sacrificing them and eating them. They'd eat their arms and their legs. When he saw, so basically the chiefs are, okay, I'll back it up a paragraph. And to deal with us, which would not please their lord Montezuma. For without his permission and orders, they should not have sheltered us. So the tax gatherers are criticizing the chiefs of the city-state for harboring Cortez and his men. For without his permission and orders, they should not have sheltered us, nor given us presents of gold and jewels. And on this subject they uttered many threats against the fat cacique and the other chiefs, and ordered them at once to provide 20 Indians, men and women, to appease their gods for the wrong that had been done. So they're going to sacrifice and eat them. When he saw that what was going on, Cortez asked our interpreters, Donna Marina and Geronimo de Aguilar, why the caciques were so agitated since their arrival of those Indians. because they didn't, none of the Spaniards knew what they were saying. And we were there. Donna Marina, who understood full well what had happened, told him what was going on, and then Cortez summoned the fat chief and the other chiefs and asked them who these Indians were and why they made such a fuss about them. They replied that they were the tax gatherers of the great Montezuma, and that they had come to inquire why they had received us in their town without the permission of their lord, and that they now demanded 20 men and women to sacrifice to their god Huichilobos, so that he would give them victory over us. For they, the tax gatherers, said that Montezuma declared that he had intended to capture and make slaves of us. Cortez reassured them and bade them have no fear, for he was here with all of us in his company, and that he would chastise them, the tax gatherers. In the next chapter I will tell in full what was done about it. All right, Bernal Diaz, please tell us. Seizure of the tax gatherers. How Cortez ordered the 5 tax gatherers of Montezuma to be taken prisoners, and gave out that from that time forward neither obedience nor tribute should be rendered to the Mexicans Montezuma, and how the rebellion against Montezuma was started. As soon as Cortez understood what the chiefs were telling him, he said that he had already explained to them that our lord the king had sent him to chastise evildoers, and that he would not permit either sacrifice or robbery, and that as these tax gatherers had made this demand, he ordered them to make prisoners of them at once, and to hold them in custody until their lord Montezuma should be told the reason, namely, how they had come to rob them and carry off their wives and children as slaves and commit other violence. When the caciques heard this, they were thunderstruck at such daring. What? To order the messengers of the great Montezuma to be maltreated? They said that they were too much afraid and did not dare to do it. But Cortez went on impressing on them that the messengers should be thrown into prison at once. And so it was done, and in such a way that with some long poles and collars, such as are in use among them, they secured them so that they could not escape, and they flogged the one of them who would not allow himself to be bound. Then Cortez, which is a very similar, if you watch the movie Apocalypto, they bound the slaves that they take to Tenochtitlan in the very same fashion. Then Cortez ordered all the Chiquiches to pay no more tribute or obedience to Montezuma, and to make proclamation to that effect in all their friendly and allied towns, and if any tax gatherers came to any of their towns, to inform him of it, and he would send for them. So the news was known throughout that province, for the fat cacique promptly sent messengers to spread the tidings, and the chiefs who had come in company with the tax gatherers, as soon as they had seen them taken prisoners, noised it abroad, for each one returned to his own town to deliver the order and relate what had happened. When they witnessed deeds so marvelous and of such importance to themselves, they said that no human beings would dare to do such things, that it was the work of the Tuules, for so they call their idols their gods, which they worship, and for this reason, from that time forth, they called us Tuules, which, as I have already explained, is as much as to say that we were either gods or demons, when in the course of my story I may use the word Tuule in matters connected with our persons. Let it be understood that we Spaniards are meant. I must go back and tell about the prisoners. It was the advice of all the caciques that they should be sacrificed, so that none of them could return to Mexico to tell the story to Montezuma. But when Cortez heard this, he said that they should not be killed, and that he would take charge of them. And he set some of our soldiers to guard them. At midnight, Cortez sent for these soldiers who were in charge and said to them, "See to it that 2 of the prisoners are loosened, the 2 that appear to you the most intelligent, in such a way that the Indians of this town shall know nothing about it." And he told them to bring the prisoners to his lodging. When the prisoners came before him, he asked them through our interpreters why they were prisoners and what country they came from, as though he knew nothing about them. They replied that the caciques of Simpola and of this town, with the aid of their followers and ours, had imprisoned them. And Cortez answered that he knew nothing about it, and was sorry for it. And he ordered food to be brought them, and talked in a very friendly manner to them, and told them to return at once to their lord Montezuma, and tell him that we were all his good friends, and entirely at his service, and that lest any harm should happen to them, he had taken them from their prison, and had quarreled with the caciques who had seized them, and that anything he could do to serve them he would do with the greatest good will, and that he would order the 3 Indians, their companions, who were still held prisoners, to be freed and protected, that they too should go away at once, and not turn back to be captured and killed. The 2 prisoners replied that they valued his mercy, and said that they still had fear of falling into the hands of their enemies, and they were obliged to pass through their territory. So Cortez ordered 6 sailors to take them in a boat during the night at a distance of 4 leagues, and set them on friendly ground beyond the frontier of Simpola. When the morning came, and the caciques of the town and the fat chief found that the 2 prisoners were missing, they were all the more intent on sacrificing those that remained. If Cortez had not put it out of their power, and pretended to be enraged at the loss of the 2 who had escaped, he ordered a chain to be brought from the ships, and bound the prisoners to it, and then he ordered them to be freed from their chains, and with friendly words he told them that he would soon send them back to Mexico. I must leave this subject and say that when this was all done, all the chiefs of this town and of Simpola and the other Teutonic chiefs who had assembled asked Cortez what was to be done, and that all the force of the great Montezuma and of Mexico would descend upon them, and that they could not escape death and destruction. Cortez replied with the most cheerful countenance that he and his brothers, who were here with him, would defend them, and would kill anyone who wished to molest them. Then the caciques and the other townsmen vowed, one and all, that they would stand by us in everything we ordered them to do, and would join their forces with ours against Montezuma and all his allies. Then, in the presence of Diego de Godoy the scribe, they pledged obedience to his majesty, and messengers were sent to relate all that had happened to the other towns in that province. And as they no longer paid any tribute, and no more tax gatherers appeared, there was no end to the rejoicing at being rid of that tyranny of Montezuma. Now I will leave this incident, and tell how we agreed to descend to the plain to some fields where we began to build a fort. That this is what really took place, not the story that was told to the historian Gomera. So this is it. This is how Cortez was able to defeat Montezuma and the Aztecs with only a little over 400 men. And it was divinely orchestrated, partly because Montezuma was a horrible. The Aztecs were. It wasn't just the Aztecs; it was their culture. It was a beautiful culture, but it was very violent. And Montezuma was a terrible leader. That he was a terrible ruler. That they were enslaving people, sacrificing them, and eating them. Their relatives, the city-states, the suburbs of Mexico City, Tenochtitlan. They're going out into the suburbs and getting sacrifices of their own people, and sacrificing them and eating them during barbecues and fiestas. So how do you think you would feel with that? You know, you would hate them, but you would also fear them because they're stronger than you. And so here comes Cortez, stood up against them the first person who ever stood up against them. None of them would stand up against them. It took Cortez to stand up to the tax gatherers of Montezuma and to give them courage and confidence and hope that they could defeat Montezuma. So first, divine orchestrated events. Over a period of years, the city-states developed a hatred for Montezuma because they would kill and sacrifice their people. Second, Geronimo de Aguilar, the Spaniard who had gone on an expedition to Cozumel, his ship was shipwrecked onto the shore and was turned into a slave by the indigenous tribes of that city-state. But within that 8 years of time, he learned how to speak their dialect, but he only learned how to speak that one dialect. He couldn't speak the many dialects of all the city-states. And then Donna Marina, the poor thing, had gone through years of being abused as a sex slave, being as a mistress to vassals, is what, Bernal Diaz tried to put it, politely. But she had been passed around from city-state to city-state. And within that time of being passed around by the chiefs, that she learned all of these languages, going all the way up into Tenochtitlan, Mexico City. And not only that, but then here come the first encounter with the tax gatherers of Montezuma, and all of the chiefs of the city-states were terrified that they were going to sacrifice, and the tax gatherers were going to sacrifice and kill them, that they were all terrified that they had been giving shelter to Cortez and his men and feeding them and palling around with them. And Cortez was like, no, I'm not going to have it. These are our friends. And now that he has his two interpreters, he's able to communicate to all of them, and for them to go spread the word all throughout Mexico that, hey, we're here to protect you, and we're not going to let, Montezuma, sacrifice you anymore. That things are going to be different now. To the point they're so happy that they started calling them gods. They started calling them Tululs. So, this is just, and they still had a hard-fought battle, and I'll do another video. Please like and subscribe this. I would appreciate that. And share and comment. But, I'll do another video of the battle with Tenochtitlan. But really, this is how the battle was won right here. Cortez getting by chance, by luck, Cortez getting two interpreters to how to speak all of the languages, and then him getting political allies and alliances with all of the city-states. So now we're getting ready for Cortez. It's not just Cortez, but it's 100,000 or more Aztecs who don't like Montezuma. So now here we're starting to realize how a group of men of only 400 could defeat Montezuma and hundreds of thousands of Aztecs. It's one of the greatest stories, and even though it's not in the Bible, it's a divine story, I think. Especially with Donna Marina. Man, that hit home reading that. That was emotional. That Bernal Diaz compared the story of Donna Marina to that of Joseph. And he was a very well-spoken and intelligent man. And the fact that he wrote this in the middle 1500s, it's just, he was a highly intelligent individual, and obviously well-spoken and well-written. So in fact, he might have been smarter than me in a lot of ways. But this is how Cortez and the 400 Spaniards, conquistadors, were able to defeat 100,000 or more Aztecs, and it was because that they had 100,000 or more Aztecs on their side, and that's how it was won. And it is an event divinely orchestrated by God. But thank you very much, YouTube. Please like and subscribe. Take